Configuring Azure Active Directory authentication for Azure SQL Managed Identity is a straightforward process that enhances security and simplifies access management. This guide will walk you through the steps to configure Aad Auth for Azure SQL Managed Identity. First, understand the key concepts involved. Azure Active Directory is Microsoft's identity and access management solution, and Azure SQL Managed Identity allows Azure services to authenticate to Azure SQL without needing to store credentials in code. To begin, create an Azure Active Directory group and add the desired users to the group. This group will be used to grant access to the Azure SQL database. Next, register the Azure SQL Server in Azure Active Directory, which will enable Azure Active Directory authentication for the server. In the Azure portal, navigate to the Azure SQL Server and select Active Directory Admin. Then, select Set Admin and choose the Azure Active Directory group created earlier. This sets the group as the Active Directory Admin for the Azure SQL Server. After setting the Active Directory Admin, create a new user in the Azure SQL database for the managed identity. This is done by executing a transact SQL command that creates a new user for the Azure Active Directory group. The user will be used to authenticate to the Azure SQL database. To authenticate to the Azure SQL database using the managed identity, obtain an access token for the Azure Active Directory application. This token is then used to authenticate to the Azure SQL database. Best practices for configuring Aad Auth for Azure SQL Managed Identity include using least privilege access, regularly reviewing and updating the Active Directory group membership, and monitoring authentication logs for suspicious activity. In summary, configuring Aad Auth for Azure SQL Managed Identity involves creating an Azure Active Directory group, registering the Azure SQL Server in Azure Active Directory, setting the Active Directory admin, creating a new user in the Azure SQL database, and obtaining an access token for authentication. By following these steps and best practices, you can enhance the security and simplify access management for your Azure SQL database.